Hello everyone, I'm Fabrizio Pandini. Today is Tuesday, 15th of February, and this is a extra meeting for Cluster API, and we are going to talk about cluster resource set and add-ons. Try to tackle these in a holistic way. So I first thank you Guillermo, who organized the meeting and started the discussion on improving cluster resource set. And I would like to give a short background, or at least let me start this discussion giving my point of view on the topic. So cluster resource set was added some time ago. It helped us to step up and increase the cluster API community, and it served well. Moving on over time, I'm starting to see, we are starting to see some limit of this solution that we're not really ready to the implementation, but to the growing expectation or requirement that we have. So cluster resource set is, I try to simplify this, is a kubectl apply that basically happens when a cluster starts. When a cluster gets created, as soon as the API server is available, but now, this is the work that Guillermo started, we are starting looking for, okay, what happens whenever I want to upgrade my add-ons, I want to change my add-ons. And along this way, I've seen other requirements, like for instance, is it possible to inject some variable from my cluster into my add-ons? Like for instance, it is possible to, I don't know, to inject the cluster network CIDR into my CNI config, and so on. How do I manage upgrading add-ons when my cluster gets upgraded? And this is getting really a hot topic, because especially for CAPI and CSI, because in Kubernetes, CSI and CPI are moving out of tree, and not only we have to manage these add-ons in conjunction with the cluster lifecycle, but we have also to help the user to transition toward out of tree CSI. And so, yeah, given that I have in mind all this requirement, I would like to bring together some people, some folks interested in the topic, and see if there are other ideas, other requirements, if there is the chance to address them in a more organic way. And yeah, so this is my intro. I'll leave the floor to someone else to chime in. Guillermo, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. I think you already summarized it very well. To be honest, for me, the only requirement that I have about this is to be able to update those resources whenever the original definition in the management cluster has been updated. So whatever was tackled by my original design. So I guess I'm going to be here more as a listener than proposing new requirements. Obviously, that said, I'm not married at all with that proposal that I wrote. I'm more than happy to toss that and then come up with something new, as you said, something maybe more holistic that fulfills the requirements for everyone else. But yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents, which is mostly I don't have anything else to add there.
Someone else? Max, Luca, someone that can provide a different perspective to the topic?
I mean, I definitely have a different topic on that, a different perspective, because we basically directly skipped cluster resource sets for external tooling with Flux to alleviate those problems, and are basically doing all of that out of band, mostly because we needed templating at some point and variable injection.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. The question is, does it make sense to re-implement everything here, or basically just build hooks for existing tooling? Because a lot of people will have existing tooling to roll out things into clusters.
Yeah.
One comment on that. I think it's going to be, and please disagree if this makes sense, but I think it's going to be very important moving forward once we come up with a list of requirements to try to scope down what are the things that we consider cluster add-ons that need to be tied to the cluster lifecycle, which is what copy is concerned about, and what are just like, I hate using the word workload because they don't necessarily need to be workload add-ons, but what are the things that don't need to be tied and are not tied necessarily to the cluster lifecycle? Because I don't know, as you said, there are like a million tools, whether they're custom or open source, that are there to roll out new deployment or new CRDs or whatever it is. And I think we'll be doing us a bad favor if we start including all of these things and we try to include all those use cases in this thing, which from at least my idea has been that whatever copy allow us to do in terms of like CRDs or add-ons, it has to be always add-ons that are completely tied to the cluster lifecycle. Hence, they can't be managed in any other way.
That's a good point. This API should be concerned only of add-ons strictly linked with the cluster lifecycle.
Would that include Calico? I mean, we need Calico to get nodes ready, but it's not like the Calico version is linked to our Kubernetes version.
That's a good point. TBD, CNI. We need it, but it has a different life cycle.
Also, CSI for most providers like vSphere also has a different life cycle than your cluster. There is some version reliance, but it's not really hard.
Okay, CSI and I guess also CPI.
Not kind of. So in CSI is usually you have totally independent versions, and you might need a newer version to support a newer Kubernetes version. But for CPI, it's usually that each of those cloud providers building a new release for a new Kubernetes release. As far as I'm aware, I saw it in OpenStack and AWS.
I mean,
So
the normal Kubernetes versions you should apply for CPI, but not for CSI.
So if I got it right, CPI has strict version reliance.
Yeah, I think it's more like they're usually releasing new versions, but it's not like the old version doesn't work. but I would say to do it right, we should use the corresponding version for the right Kubernetes release.
Yeah, there is also a cap. I remember there is a cap we should investigate.
So I can contribute now if you want. So as Max was saying, we also use external means to deploy resources on clusters, and by that what I mean, we use pure GitOps. We deploy Argo CD and we point Argo CD to our repo once the cluster is ready. But it would be nice to have something to deploy the necessary things to have Argo CD running. So all you said is right. I was actually going to mention CNI, CSI, but I wouldn't mind if there was an option also to deploy a basic add-on like Argo CD that is then going to point somewhere and can then spin up all the remainings, right? So we still need to bridge the gap that is from the cluster to Argo CD. Then Argo CD can do the rest, and can be Argo CD, can be Flux. But if you don't have anything there that then can push things, you still have to bridge that gap, right? So I don't know how Max is doing that. We personally have some external automation ourselves, but then goes outside of the defining Kubernetes resources, right? So you have a Kubernetes control cluster, or I don't remember what is the name for the copy project. But then once that is done, you have to monitor the fact that there is a secret there, get the secret, push some extra resources, and then you can enable the Git flow approach. So it would be nice if this would be the component that bridges the gap between that and GitOps, right? For instance.
Yeah. So I think that when I listen to this, is that what I got is that what user wants is that they want to manage their add-ons with a single tooling. And for some add-ons which are linked to the cluster, they want to that cluster API hooks into their add-on management, but not replace it. And I like this idea, because I don't think that as a cluster API we have to reinvent add-on management. There are great tools out there. There is Helm, there is KApp, or there are many GitOps tools.
It's not just, sorry, Fabrizio, it's not just about who controls, but it is actually about ownership of the cluster. For instance, for one of the clients, I'm using cluster API to deploy multiple clusters that then are controlled by different teams, right? So you actually want to give control of that cluster to a different team altogether and retain the control of the control cluster that then does provisioning. So you don't necessarily want to give them access to the control cluster, right, so the main cluster, but you want to give them access to their children's, and different people can have access to different clusters, and so that they can manage their own cluster. In fact, it would be amazing if once the cluster API has provisioned the CNI and all the other components, it could give ownership to the children cluster, right? The children cluster can take control of those even, right?
Yeah, makes sense. So what I was wondering along this line is that maybe that in future, or in a better solution, will be having cluster API that basically orchestrate something else. So, or having something that watch cluster API and orchestrate something else. I make an example. If we have a controller that looks, let's assume I want to use Helm, but I think the same apply for every tooling that is out there. So if I have something that watch for cluster API, and maybe in nearest future for runtime extension as well. So if you have this something that recognize that a cluster is being provisioning, it is the moment to install add-ons, and then just calls Helm install add-ons. We can leverage on templating, variable substitution, stuff like that out of the box. And the same should apply. My cluster is upgrading. The external component, this external component should have all the knowledge about the add-ons. So these are CPI. That means that I need to upgrade it when a Kubernetes version is upgraded. Or this is a CNI. I don't have to know nothing when Kubernetes is upgraded. So my point is that if we move from if we move, if we start thinking about moving from CRS, which is simple apply, to something higher level, probably a controller that can basically hooks in tools outside of cluster API, maybe that we give a better experience to our user, and because we give the full power of every add-on or GitOps tool, but at the same time we free up cluster API of this task that as a team, cluster API team, as a community, I don't see us to implement something better than Helm or Flux. It is not our goal. So my idea is that, okay, this is a problem, let's federate or let's bridge to whatever is out there in the community to solve this problem.
And Fabrizio, are you thinking this controller is going to run on the management cluster or in the created clusters? What's your, because how do you describe, how you described it? I assumed that it was in the control class, in the children clusters, right? That's what I assumed, but maybe I was assuming wrong.
I don't have a strong assumption. I think that it really goes back to Guglielmo's point. What do we want to manage? For sure, we want to manage only a subset of let me say, we want to orchestrate only a subset of add-ons, which are the ones that are somehow linked to the cluster, the one that we need to get the cluster operational. Okay, I understand that this definition is, let me say, it's not written in the stone. Someone could argue that, I don't know, matrix is something that I need. Or someone could argue not, you can apply matrix totally out of band of cluster management. So it is something that we have to refine. But I think that what we have to ensure is that those are cluster add-ons, and we need them when the cluster get created, upgraded, updated, or upgraded, and deleted. So we need to orchestrate this step. And then, of course, I think that once the cluster is up, everyone can use their tooling, install add-ons, but this goes out, let me say, of the cluster. It's like application, we don't manage them. It is on the user realms. So
I have an idea / comment about that, and it might be the same thing that you're talking about, Fabrizio. I think the direction that you're pointing to is very, very interesting, which is maybe we shouldn't care about how or when to apply those resources. Maybe we should just care about giving those external tools the ability to hook into the lifecycle, which I think is very, and I hate to like tie two different projects together, two different features, but I think this clearly ties to what you presented the other day, the runtime hooks or runtime extensions, right? Like, what if instead of trying to implement a Postman version of like Flags or Argo, which is our CRS, what if we just give those hooks to the external tools? So what you were mentioning about giving the information to Helm, that's basically the Helm controller that Flags implemented, right? So why don't we just give those hooks, which is giving the information to those tools, and then somehow define a way to join that bridge, right? Whether it's like through a controller or something else, and then you can take that webhook that hook that cluster API is giving you, and then from there talk to the Helm controller, talk to Flags, talk to Argo in the way that you want to, and then trigger that. So instead of having the applying logic in copy, what we will have is the hook logic in copy, and then we will leave up to those external tools how do the applying logic happens.
yeah, I think yeah, we are on the same page. I'm not sure that hooks will be enough, or we need hooks plus controller, stuff like that. It's something that we have to figure it out. Probably controller is something that we can have, we can implement today. Hooks is something that will come somewhere down the line. But yeah, that's the point. I don't think that we have to impose user our solution. I think that it is much better if we allow user to bring in their own tooling and we just orchestrate it. We give them, we give the possibility. I think that there should be an easy path. So if someone comes and it does not have flags or whatever, we should give him install the cluster, install the, I don't know, cluster API add-on for Helm, add-on manager for Helm, and he gets a flow without need to spinning up external tooling. This is part of an open source project giving a nice quick start experience. But at the same time, if someone wants to bring in Flux, Argo CD, or whatever, why not?
I think we need a quick and easy reference implementation, especially for end-to-end testing too, but also for a good quick start flow. That's it.
There is another model that that I've seen recently, and it makes a lot of sense to me, but it's gonna get more embedded into the management cluster. That is what Rancher Fleet does. I don't know if you have seen the Rancher Fleet project. They actually have bundles defined, and they follow this model of a management cluster that define add-ons in there, and then you can manage multiple clusters from a management cluster, and they solve exactly this problem, right? Installing add-ons. You can have a look at it. There's Rancher Fleet, and they actually define bundles, and then what they define cluster groups, right? And the cluster groups have specific definition, configuration for the add-ons. So they're actually exactly trying to solve these. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because what they're doing, they're actually defining specific configuration for a group of clusters. So they define clustering groups. And so it doesn't matter how many clusters you have, you can say, okay, this is the bundle for these cluster groups. And so every time a new cluster is spun up in that group, it's going to receive the same amount of add-ons, applications, and so on. So that's a model, but that's they have defined a new custom resource definition. They've defined a new language for that, right? So it's not hooking into external tools. Then it's actually, let's say, adopting a similar approach to what they have.
I think the interesting point about that is how do they decide when to deploy which version of things? So when we upgrade to a new Kubernetes version, how could that? I looked at Fleet before because I tried to solve that multi-cluster add-on management problem in the past. Yeah, but I guess it probably comes down to a similar question. How do we bridge that gap? Maybe we can bridge it for both. I mean, the previous idea of just having some kind of bridge to Helm, but also from looking from a multi-cluster add-on management perspective. Maybe the solution is the same on our side.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that multi-cluster add-on management, it is just, let me say, the next level of abstraction as soon as you have a single cluster add-on management. So I kind of agree, but we first have to define the primitives, and then we can make it. And if you think at cluster resource set, at the end it is a multi-cluster, a very simple multi-cluster. So it is something that we already have in the radar, because we look at the cluster from a management cluster point of view, where you can manage many. So yeah, we will get there. I'm more concerned in defining.
Yeah, I was just bringing that up in relationship of connecting external tools, right? So when you connect external tools, then you have to keep that problem in mind, because the moment you connect external tools, the external tools are not going to have these built in, right? So
yes,
I mean, it's not, the user is going to have to solve it himself. That's what I'm saying, right? That is not a bad thing. It's just something to keep in mind.
So Max, Vince, opinion on where the discussion is moving on?
No, I think this is all fruitful, and it reinforces, the vision of Cluster API, which is not necessarily like to re-implement the state of the world, but to provide the foundation and the hub, be the hub for integrations to happen. That said, like I'm also a fan to have like a batteries included, so I would expect something like Helm to be shipping with Cluster API potentially as the default implementation, and then we can allow for other implementers to also probably ship with Cluster API as long as they have maintainers for it.
Okay, Cluster API should be the foundation. So trying to move this in something more concrete or something actionable. So currently we have Guillermo has a need, and he needs basically to upgrade add-on previously installed. Okay, the proposal and the PR that is out there kind of solve the problem, but partially, because for instance, it does not take care of deleting objects. So it is, I think that I'm not opposed to it as soon as we document the limitation. But at the same time, I would like to get this to get a discussion moving that allows us to move away to move to something where yeah, we leverage the power of the ecosystem instead of trying to reinventing the wheel. And any idea, suggestion how we can get there, or is there someone really interested in this topic?
I think as usual, it comes down to who has time to work on it.
So,
but it might be a good idea to, if folks have priorities which match that, to improve cluster resource set a bit, to be able to have something for CPI, CCM, etc. And because they're getting enabled per default. But agree, we should have a more holistic solution midterm or long term.
Yeah, my biggest concern is the following. With cluster resource set, are we able to tackle CPI, CSI migration?
I think as today, right? I mean, basically comes down to when the user upgrades a cluster, he also has to upgrade a cluster resource set, and then it's getting rolled out with more or less good timing, but probably good enough.
Yeah,
good enough to have it working, not really as a great solution.
I was going to add, that's mostly the reason I started with this proposal, right? It was mostly for the CPI and CSI, specifically for vSphere clusters. But I agree it is not the perfect solution. I just started with this because in my mind, it was the path of least resistance to get to something that was working, right? Until now, if you want something like that, you need to implement it yourself. If now cluster resource sets support some kind of update, as long as you apply those new CRS at the same time that you apply the cluster upgrade, then it kind of works. Regarding what you said, Fabrizio, about who's interested, I'm interested in this, and I'll probably have some time to work on this. It's just, what do we mean by working on this? Like, are you talking about working towards that direction that you pointed us, like crossing the bridge between Copy and other tools as Helm, other ideas? I think we had a great conversation here, but this still seems a little bit too vague to me to like say I'm going to work on this, because if it's just exploring ideas, I agree with that, and I can start doing that. But working on this project, I don't think we have really defined what we want to do in order for me to say, okay, I'm just going to have this and going to start iterating on it.
That's yeah, I agree. That's the same thing that I was going to figure it out. So in the past, I've started mulling around this idea of cluster API orchestrating Helm. I've written down a document. I can try to bring it to a decent state, and then we can start see people having people to join in and see if this is the right direction. But my first concern is that, okay, as a community, we agree that this is the right direction. If we agree that this is the right direction, my concern number one is that it's something that we need now badly due to CPI, CNI, and this is something that I will ask to the community tomorrow. That means we will gather feedback for all the other provider. You have looked at the atmosphere, but we need feedback from all the other provider. If with CRS plus CRS update, we can go on with CPI, CSI migration. Maybe not in the best way, but we can deal with it. Then we can figure it out what happened with Addons, with a different priority. Otherwise, this is P0 because 124 is out of the door, and we have to figure it out. So I will leave the final decision about how do we proceed to the community in terms of priority. I think that nevertheless, it is a good idea that I share this document just as a starting point, because I've invested a little bit of time writing it. And then we try to make this a proposal with the goal that we lay down a path forward for cluster API orchestrating Addons tools.
Gotcha. Are you saying, just to clarify, are you saying that you'll be in favor of, if the community is in favor of it, adding a little bit of functionality to cluster resource sets so we solve the problem in the short term, and in the meantime, we start working on that Helm/hook, whatever, document as our long-term, more holistic solution? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. I will agree with that. And regarding what you said about the current proposal not supporting delete, it is something that we could include there. It will increase the complexity a little bit, but I thought about it, and I think there is a way we will need to maybe modify a little bit the binding objects. But if the community thinks that having the delete functionality is a road blocker, and without it, this solution doesn't make sense, I think it's something that design could be expanded on, in order to still have that short solution that fulfills the community needs. And then we can, in the meantime, move forward with the other one.
Sorry, Vince, go on.
No, go ahead. I can.
I was just asking if there are we in the current proposal with the cluster resource set to upgrade of add-ons, because one critical things that I've seen in the past is that you may have a critical bug in one of the components, and if you cannot upgrade in a timely manner, that can be a real issue, right? So upgrade for me is more important than delete.
Yeah, the current proposal is about upgrade. The problem is that it is only apply a new YAML, and if the delta between the old and the new is objects are removed, you don't get what expected, because it will be so. It is a very simple upgrade, and
Okay.
making it more complex, let's mean that we are going down the path to reinvent Helm. And so this is where I got the question. But yeah, I'm taking note. Vince, what you were...
Yeah, so I mean, if we're looking to build like a different add-on management story, I would rather put CRS as like a market as legacy and deprecated rather than continue improving it. Mostly because, yeah, like, I mean, we do, like, if we add work to it, we have to support it. And on top of that, like, folks will start to relying on it like much more than they are today as well. Which is it's a huge concern, because then we have to talk about migration instead of like, this is deprecated, will be removed, and then you just use the new thing when it comes. For CAPI and CSI, which we could also consider, I think so for 123, it's just CSI that's actually being required out of 3. But we could also consider that, like, to just put documentation up, because CSI is still like, I mean, it is something that's required for a cluster for storage, but it's not something that, like, if you don't install it, the cluster would never come up, like CNI. Like it's not gonna get ready.
Just one point I raised before in the chat. It's definitely not great, but instead of implementing an upgrade in cluster kernel, in cluster resource set, you could also just deploy another cluster resource set. I mean, someone has to do that, but that will also lead to an apply. And maybe if we actually want to have another solution, maybe documenting that thing is an even better solution, but maybe good enough.
Use on that note, I'm not sure that will work, because if what you're trying is to upgrade or update a resource that already exists in the workload cluster, even if you create a new cluster resource set with a new object definition, if that definition points to the same object, like same name, same namespace, same type, it won't reapply it. It will detect that it's there, and then it won't. It will just create the object, the resource binding, saying that it applied it at that moment, but it won't change the object that already existed.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't know enough about the cluster resource implementation.
Okay, so I think that the main point, the main TLDR, is that we have to discuss with the community, get a detailed feeling and a detailed feedback. Is CPI, CSI blocking, or we can get it working with what we have? And if we have to, and if we want to evolve the system, the community should have a say if CRS is the right way to go and to increase it, assuming that we have to manage it, and then assuming that and keep it for granted that we are asking to the user to manage add-ons in 2 different ways, or if we want to have a unified story where cluster PI just orchestrates other stuff, and so the user is happier and can have all the power of its tooling and all the things that we discussed. So let's make cluster resource set deprecated legacy as soon as possible. Why? longer time. Okay, I'm really happy about the discussion and the feedback. I think that we have a couple of points to bring back to the main, to the broader team. Is there someone else, something that we want to add, that someone else want to add? Guillermo, no. Stefan, no. Vince, okay. Max, or people that joined later, Jakob, Nick, opinions? Okay, it seems that we are done. I take an action item to report to add a point to tomorrow meeting agenda and try to keep this moving.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Fabrizio, we should probably try to not schedule a meeting on the same time frame as the clustered on project next time.
Okay, that was not intentional.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone. See you tomorrow at the meeting. Bye bye.